Three speakers, they come from different and diverse background as ASEAN. And you have heard what they have said about the drivers and also the challenges and opportunities that ASEAN will have as it builds its economic community. Now, one message that came out from the three of them is intra-ASEAN trade and intra-ASEAN investment is going to be a driver. In fact, intra-ASEAN trade is now growing, but still around 25%, but growing. It's about a quarter of ASEAN's trade, about close to $400 billion. And intra-ASEAN investment is also growing about 20% or so. And it's actually the number one in terms of overall foreign direct investment coming into ASEAN. So I understand and recognize that as an important aspect in terms of trade and investment. My question is actually to, perhaps I'll start with Alex, because there's always this talk about intra-ASEAN trade and intra-ASEAN investment are important, but they will not go beyond a certain percentage because ASEAN is basically an outward-looking organization. That means 75% of the trade is always with the rest of the world. So how do you think that intra-ASEAN trade and intra-ASEAN investment will play a part? Because as part of the production base, if you look at ASEAN as a production base, most of the goods being traded are intermediary goods. So from your automotive sector and other sectors that you are involved in, where do you see ASEAN, intra-ASEAN trade and intra-ASEAN investment going?
Well, I think in the case of the automotive sector, everything always starts with the OEMs. And aside from national car in Malaysia, there essentially are no ASEAN OEMs. They're all Japanese, Korean, European. So if there were no boundaries, they would probably keep their production hubs anywhere in the world and ship them into ASEAN countries. Now, that's not the way things are. At the moment, every country has its incentives to have local assembly in their own country. And I think if one just can only regionalize that, one still wants to encourage the technology to be developed and manufacturing components, ecosystems, assembly to take place within some or other of the ASEAN countries. But which country does what? I think it's a question of finding the competitive niche. And then naturally you'll have intra-ASEAN trade flows. And if you take countries like Thailand, I mean, you just look at the neighborhoods. Sometimes it's just 100 kilometers up the road is Myanmar, or down the road is Malaysia. So the logistics shouldn't be a problem. So I think it's really encouraging the global manufacturers to think of ASEAN as one production base, get the manufacturing here, but not try and have every country duplicating it in a highly costly and protectionist way. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for intra-ASEAN trade flows.
Now, interesting, you mentioned that looking at ASEAN as one single investment entity. Now, David, you have been working with ASEAN for more than 10 over years, I believe. Do you see ASEAN now, as it goes towards the economic community by 2015, becoming a single investment destination? Is this how businesses see ASEAN as we go forward?
Well, Nathan, yes. I'm not only an optimist, I really see improvement in ASEAN working as a single market. But we do need to still tidy up certain things to make ourselves more competitive, more cost conscious. For example, because I'm asked to talk about shipping here. Now, this concept of cabotage is something that we perhaps should look at. Now, it's a sacred cow. The ASEAN single shipping market specifically exclude any cabotage. Now, incidentally, for those not in the shipping side, cabotage is the right to carry cargo from one domestic port to another domestic port, and it's reserved normally for national carriers. But by doing so, let's say you've got an efficient vessel that can carry goods from outside your country to one of your ports, and then that efficient ship can bring that cargo to the next port, or in the process, collect some cargo from port A to bring it to port B. The whole process becomes more efficient, and the cost will be lower. But with cabotage, the outside ship will have to drop the cargo in port A, and a national carrier come along, transshipment costs and what have you, storage costs, reloading costs, and a less efficient, smaller ship will bring it to the next port. Now, people always say cabotage is a sacred cow, but really is it a sacred cow? Countries have unilaterally waived cabotage. I mean, I can give you 3 examples. One, China. When Hong Kong returned to China, strictly speaking, trade between Hong Kong and Shanghai is cabotage, because it's one country. But if the Chinese were to say they apply that, then Hong Kong is dead, and so is the whole of southern China. So the Chinese therefore announced that they will waive cabotage when it comes to Hong Kong and the Chinese ports. So any ships in the world can carry that trade. New Zealand, because of the globalization and the merger of shipping lines, we no longer have the Blue Funnel ships and the KLM ships going between North and South Island. The New Zealanders were worried that cargo cannot move between North and South Island. They don't have enough, they don't have ships. They're not very much a shipping nation. So the New Zealanders waived cabotage. Even our neighbor Malaysia at one time, temporary, I think they've stopped doing that, waived cabotage between Penang and Port Klang in order to get the critical mass of cargo down from Penang into Port Klang to develop Port Klang as a hub. So you can waive cabotage. Now, in all those 3 instances, when you waive cabotage, WTO rules require that you open it up to the rest of the world. But here we are talking about ASEAN. ASEAN is a free trade area. So if ASEAN were to do that, then we can keep it within ASEAN. We can waive cabotage within ASEAN. Now, you can then, this begs the question, says, okay, if country A and B in ASEAN agree, what is there to prevent country C from free riding when country C itself is not opening up? Now, we trade officials have way back in 2003 fixed that. We have an ASEAN minus X situation, an agreement which is a variation of the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services, which allow countries that do not fulfill the same requirement from being exempted from this deal. I think even WTO and Geneva has not come up with that, but we in ASEAN have already done it. So my message is really, if there's a political will, leave it to the business sector and your trade officials, we can fix it. But first, we need the political leaders to say we are prepared to do it. So it can be done. It's just that, do we have the political will? This was why I ended my presentation with needs political will.
Yeah, political will and the timing, I guess, in ASEAN. Now, interestingly, I wanted to ask VPO this question about the food industry, because I'm also the principal advisor to the ASEAN Food and Beverage Alliance. And food is a sector, whether you are in crisis or good times, everybody has to consume. So it's quite a dynamic sector. Now, some of the issues that we are facing in the food sector, one is, of course, the harmonization of standards. Second is looking at addressing non-tariff barriers. Now, since you come from one of the biggest food manufacturing company in Myanmar, and you mentioned about the importance of standards harmonization, do you think ASEAN is doing enough in the area of standards harmonization? Or do you see this as one of the impediments as ASEAN go forward in terms of integration?
So ASEAN is moving towards integration. They are discussing everything, but the thing is the pace is just way too slow. When we're talking about harmonization of standards, there are many technical things that we have to take into account. There are also national and local regulations that some of which probably you cannot do it. So ASEAN is doing, but they're not doing enough. They're moving at a very slow pace. And at this current pace, we will not be ready for 2015.
Thank you. Now I see that I have only about 5 minutes, so I want to open up the discussion to the floor. So if you have any comments or any questions to ask the panelists, please do so now. Can I have a show of hands? Yes, please.
Hi. My question is for David, but I mean, other panelists, of course, may want to comment as well. This morning we heard on the aviation side that because of the agreements that ASEAN is signing with China and neighboring countries, that those countries are now starting to gain advantages because they have a more direct access than the ASEAN member states do with each other. With the shipping, with the single shipping market that's proposed, you're saying it needs political will. Are we in a situation where we have the same danger for ASEAN, that with other trade agreements that are being signed, that shipping routes may be more open and easier between the individual members and other trade partners outside ASEAN, or is that less of an issue on the shipping side versus the aviation side?
So let me take 2 or 3 questions together because we don't have enough time. So is there any other questions from the floor?
Sorry, this would be for Mr. Waifio. You were talking about, we had a good presentation on all the things that are going on in ASEAN regarding maritime shipping. In your view, in ASEAN, is there things moving in the food industry since, with the exception of Singapore, many of the economies are largely agrarian? Do we see things like organic standardization or things like that you see that are important for the industry to move forward?
Thank you. So we'll take the 2 questions. Yeah, David, you.
Okay, in shipping, it's not a real worry because whilst under the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services, we have been opening things among ourselves, even into maritime and shipping. We have not been offering that to our dialogue partners. One, because they are more protective than us, and they have not asked opening in shipping of us. Because in our ASEAN Plus FTAs, China, in the ASEAN-China agreement, services was not that major section in the FTA, and shipping services was not covered. Similarly with the Japanese. In fact, the Japanese do not really have a section on services. We are now starting to talk. It was primarily an FTA on goods. The most comprehensive ASEAN Plus FTA is the ASEAN Plus Korea. And the Koreans did not ask for shipping because they are so protective themselves. And similarly with Australia and New Zealand, shipping did not feature much in the discussion because the Australians and New Zealanders were really after other business services in the service package. So we are not there yet. But eventually we may be if we don't get our act in our house in order first. And therein we have the same condition that we have agreed amongst ourselves, that in ASEAN we will not offer anything to anybody else without offering it to ourselves first. You know, so that I think will put us in good state.
Thank you. Waipio, you want to answer the...
In terms of standards, that actually there are a few standards that ASEAN is looking at as a whole. Now, those standards cover raw materials, raw fruits and vegetables, as well as processed food. GAP, good agricultural practices. We also have for production, harvesting, post-harvesting, handling, livestock, fish, shrimp, minimum residue levels, and the latest one that that they're talking about is HACCP, which is hazard analysis critical control points that are necessary for safe foods. So that is one thing. They are already talking about including 2 other things, which is organic certification. Organic certification is different from country to country. Myanmar has their own. I mean, it's not vastly different, but it does differ. For example, in organic certification, countries might differ in how many years you need that to be organic, pesticide-free, before you actually state that it is organic. Some countries go further beyond that, and they want an actual history of the land itself for maybe 5 to 7 years. So that's one thing. Another thing that they will be looking into is GMOs, the concept of genetically modified organisms. Now there's a big hoo-ha about this, but it is going to, the topic is going to stay, and they will be talking about that.
Thank you. We just run out of time, and I've been kind of signaled by the organizer that I have to stop now. I know this is a very interesting discussion. I mean, you can always catch the 3 speakers outside when they're having a break to ask your questions. Now, I just like to thank all of the 3 of them because they come from a very different environment and they have very different views, but at the same time, there's some common grounds that we looked at. It's a very interesting period for ASEAN, and the ASEAN economic community is quite close, and ASEAN will have to do a lot of things, as many of them have already mentioned, the challenges as well as the opportunities that the community will present. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the 3 panelists, Alex, Waipio, and David, for the interesting presentation and also participating in the interaction with the audience. Thank you very much. Can we give them a round of applause, please?